Rise and shine, and as we promised you, we do have a very special guest in the studios together with us today on this Binara Full Moon Pohe Day to discuss about one important aspect of Buddhism and to gift it to you all. So when speaking of the practice of Buddhism, it is something very, very important in a world where we run for material things rather than for spirituality in most cases. This is due to the busy schedules that people live in. And how can we really inculcate the spiritual values within us and be a person who is practicing good qualities that Lord Buddha has taught us is always a question. So when speaking of this, to give us an insight on this, we do have Mr. Vipula Wanigasekera, the former senior diplomat, Director General of Sri Lanka Tourism Authority, and who is currently a senior lecturer at the NSBM Green University, together with us today. Good morning to you, sir. So talking to you about spirituality, let me first ask you, what is spirituality in the first place?
Well, spirituality has several definitions. It has several meanings, in fact, and also the terminology has evolved through centuries. I think the easiest way to describe spirituality is to look at three spheres from which the spirituality emerges. The one is the religious sphere, where there is a faith or belief followed by prayers and traditions for mundane benefits as well as benefits from for your life hereafter. Then the spirituality that is emerging from philosophies such as Buddhism, where people are urged to investigate your inner machine. You know, usually we have machines to investigate or analyze the world, but it's the other way around, to go on an inward journey to see how the mind and body works. And that's another level of spirituality. And there is also spirituality because there are some people who are neither religious nor philosophical, but they are leading a kind of a virtuous life. So through intellectual discussions, what has surfaced are the rules, the regulations, and social order. That's why there are some countries, they don't follow any religions, and there is no philosophy, there are no spiritual, but the countries don't have that kind of problems because it's the understanding which leads to a situation where one is not a burden to another. So these are the three areas from which you can very briefly describe the spirituality.
Right. So when speaking of tourism, on the other hand, as you're very much engaged in tourism as well, let's talk a little bit about what spiritual tourism is. I think this is very much relevant to Sri Lanka, especially because as a country that is blooming in tourism, tourist industry, especially in the current arena, how we can really propagate spiritual tourism is one important thing, I believe, with the incoming number of foreigners to the country.
Yes, as you said, I think Sri Lanka had a phenomenal growth in tourist arrivals. In the last 8 years or so, we had from 500,000 to 2 million last year. And this year we are expecting the numbers to go up to about 2.5 million. So the numbers are growing. And also there is a need for destinations to understand why people travel. And that's why tourism has been categorized and classified as agri-tourism, eco-tourism, wildlife tourism, adventure tourism, and so on. It's merely because it's an academic exercise, but that is to understand the reasons that triggers people to travel. So spiritual tourism, some years ago, any travel that is connected to spirituality, maybe visiting a place of worship, or maybe going to a retreat for a few days, or engaging some meditation. Now I remember there used to be a place called Wat Phonanachat in Thailand, that is this Ajahn family. They go and ordain themselves as monks for a few months and then they come back. And that was called spiritual tourism. But however, in the last 5 years or so, there is a clear demarcation between pilgrim tourism and spiritual tourism. So anyone, for instance, the Buddhists who go to Lumbini, Saranath, Buddha Gaya, they are actually pilgrimages. And similarly, the Christians going to Jerusalem and Muslims going to Mecca, these are all pilgrim tourists. But spiritual tourism is essentially the travel that entails someone who is searching for a different way of looking at life, and someone who is seeking inner peace, probably having seen vicissitudes in life and probably having gone through a lot of difficulties in life, to see whether there is another way you could find peace and happiness away from wealth, away from power, away from recognition or designations, something like that. And that is spiritualism. So as you rightly said, Sri Lanka has a lot of potential. Whether we have gained the real advantage of that is another question.
And looking at that, Ms. Wanigasekera, I should clearly mention there is opportunity for sure, because we being a predominantly Buddhist country and with a very proud history of more than 2,500 years, and what we have learned and the kind of significance that it has had on the country's history and the current situation with the post-war. As you said, the numbers have increased fivefold, at now hopefully it will be about 2.5 million by 2017. What's the current status of Sri Lankan tourism and on that the spiritual tourism?
Yes, one, in terms of marketing, we say USP or unique selling proposition. What we are offering is diversity in compactness. So from wildlife to culture to ancient cities to... But I would probably say the biggest attraction is this message of Lord Buddha, if that can be communicated to the international community. Unfortunately, I'm not sure whether we have exploited that potential. The reason being, somehow in the last few decades, the practicing of Dhamma has become very local. I wonder whether the core message is somewhat submerged, perhaps due to practice of traditions, rituals, and so on. Because the people who are traveling or spiritual seekers, what they are looking for is a core message. That's all they want. And to see that can be compared with their own experience, because otherwise it becomes a belief, because they are running away from beliefs and looking for something that can be experienced. So if that is not offered, there's a tendency for them to look for other places and other people. So Sri Lanka also needs to create the right environment for visitors to learn Dhamma and to understand the key messages that Lord Buddha has communicated throughout his journey. And if that is done, language is also another issue when it comes to spiritual tourism, because you also have to communicate in a language that they understand, not necessarily English. We have a lot of Germans coming and French people. In that sense, yes, there's a great potential, but with the right environment, and if some efforts are taken towards promoting spiritual tourism, that can be the biggest attraction.
Mm-hmm. So, when we speak of spiritual tourism, I would like to ask you, what are the areas that we can develop and probably propose to start when it comes to spiritual tourism in Sri Lanka?
Yes, I would say definitely it's not impossible, but it is still a long shot. The reason being that we need to create the right environment in which, in fact, the locals should benefit. The indicators, the social indicators should reflect that the Dhamma is practiced in the country. So it's very difficult for a country to offer something outside which is not being practiced in the country itself. I hope you get what I'm trying to say. And indicators are, seen in the number of suicides, the the consumption of liquor and so on. So it prevents to some extent. And secondly, when it comes to spirituality, meditation, samatha, vipassana, we have several meditation centers, and I would say in my own research over several decades, I found that what is offered is very rigid. I can give you an example. There are some places they have a meditation retreat for 10 days, and our program is for 10 days. And when a tourist comes and say, look, I don't have 10 days to stay here, but I got only 6 days and 1 day to come and 1 day to go back. So 6 days is, then he gets a reply, sorry, we have the 10-day program. So either you take it or you will not get the full benefit. And I don't know whether there is anything like that in Dhamma. When Lord Buddha was walking, he was talking to Sopaka who was by the road, and there is no record to say Lord Buddha has been preaching Dhamma in palaces or in organized ways, wherever he met people who were able to understand. It was there, it doesn't matter, you have to come for it. In fact, my own meditation, the first thing I tell them was, look, this is not a class, this is not a meditation class, or this is not a workout in a gym where you do it, 1 hour and then you feel good. There's nothing like that. Sometimes a small message can trigger the inward journey, the investigation that can help people, that can transform people. And that is what is really needed, to create that environment and to have the right people to communicate the core message. And once again, I repeat that it is the core message that is required. The Four Noble Truths, the Trilakshana, Anitya, Dukkha, Anatma. I mean, you can't challenge them. Anyone, when you compare that with your experience, yes, you begin to realize, yes, there is something true. But when you bring in traditions and rituals, it's very difficult to explain the rationale behind them. So this is one reason why we need to create that environment for visitors who always question. Now, for instance, if we tell them something, well, this is what the Buddhism says, the first question they'll ask is, how do you know this? Then you will say, yes, it is written in Tripitaka Samyaka. How do you know whether that is correct? These are where the international community is questioning. And I can't expect those people to say, no, you got to believe that. In fact, Lord Buddha himself says, don't believe anything. You see, so where do you find the right track in order to reach out to these communities with a view to increasing the numbers in spiritual tourism?
And Mr. Wanigasekera, you clearly mentioned, and I think that's a very good point, looking at what the future holds for Sri Lanka. Because is it a lot to do with Sri Lanka being a very compact country where, as you said, there is so much that you can actually explore in maybe within a week? Because, as you said, from adventure to sport to history to archaeology and all that you want is available around the country, from sea to sand and everything else, the water sports and you name it, it's there. And spirituality and the spiritual tourism is just another attraction that we need to cultivate. Is it that everything has commercialized and it is becoming a bit difficult for people to actually explore within themselves as to what they want? Or because there is definitely a market for this particular spiritual tourism, because even in Europe and US, people are now realizing that there is a lot more to life than the rat race that we always have. Isn't it the case?
Exactly. And there is a drastic change in the spiritual tourism right now. Those who have come to this part of the world, not only Sri Lanka but also India, these people have gone back and they have started offering this to their own people in their country. And then they also travel. Today, travel is, so if you say, for instance, Eckhart Tolle is offering a discourse in Australia, whereas he lives in Canada, you can see hundreds and hundreds of people travel to Australia to listen to him. So that is where it is today. And as you rightly said, we had ancient cities in our country. They were never attractions until UNESCO declared them as World Heritage Sites. So the moment the international community comes to know there is something here which is worthwhile, Dhamma is the same. there is a need for us to say there is something that is preserved over thousands of years, pure Theravada, come and see. And that's the message of Lord Buddha also, come and see. It's not come and learn.
Absolutely.
Yes, I think that's very important, especially when we speak of the practice. The practice is something that is really required and is very much important, I believe, after all, when we speak of the Buddhism in a nutshell. The practice is what is really necessary. So let me finally ask you now, when we speak of tourism and spiritual tourism, like you rightly mentioned, it is something that we really need to start developing in Sri Lanka, especially with the boost in the tourist industry. So how do you think that individually we can do something about this?
Well, I could relate my own experience. When I was the head of Sri Lanka Tourism, one of the things I wanted to do was to initiate something to develop spiritual tourism. So what I did was, I have been researching into Dhamma for decades, and I launched a book in 2013, and not a big one. It's called Pointers to Enlightenment, and that is meant for tourists. It was available in all the shops that the tourists visit. And after launching the book, within a couple of weeks, I was invited by the tourism industry. We have read your book. It seems that there is a message you want to communicate. Why don't you start this, you can call it meditation, you can call it a retreat, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but can you please come and do this? And I would say my last program is probably the 400th meditation session, which I conduct in various hotels, retreats and yoga centers. So what they do is they fix an appointment, and then they call me, and I'm working. I'm a full-time lecturer, but I fix the appointment in the evening or during the weekends. It doesn't matter. Sometimes there are 5 people, sometimes there are 25 people. Of course, if the number increases, you need technology. And what I do is, the first 15 to 20 minutes, it's a discourse to communicate the necessity to look at life and existence from a different perspective, and then slowly take them through this meditative session, which is a combination of samatha and vidarsana. And if as an individual I could do that, you can imagine a sasana which has got so many the Buddhist monks and so many places, the temples. This could be the biggest attraction. And some countries are benefiting. As I said before, today the people who have gone out, they are offering, and that has triggered so much travel. 30 to 40 million people traveling out looking for inner peace, and it's a huge number. And all we need is 2%, 3%, and I'm sure that would have a lot of mutual benefits between the countries from where they travel.
Do we really need to up the language barrier that we have had over the years, Mr. Wanigasekera? Because I think probably, as you very clearly mentioned, why you are being invited is probably the language proficiency. And is it the reason why that we are not attracting enough tourists to the country?
I do not think that you should be very eloquent and your vocabulary should be so, I don't speak that kind of profound English, but my English is good enough, I believe, to communicate the message. So as long as you can pass a few pointers across, and that would be good enough. And after all, this discourse that I conduct for 15 minutes, and then you have 45 minutes of meditation, all they have to do is to test what I mentioned at the beginning. You can communicate that even if you read a piece of paper, that is good enough. So you don't have to master the language. But if you know other languages like French and German, and because there are some, my last occasion there were a lot of Japanese, so there was an interpreter. So every time I say here to interpret, yes, you need the language. There is a barrier. You have to overcome that. But then you should not take it as something that, you know, people have to master the language to do this. It's not necessary.
So there's so much to look forward to when it comes to day-to-day life. And as we said, spiritual tourism is something that Sri Lanka can definitely nurture and take forward. We've got to thank Mr. Vipula Wanigasekera for being with us on a full moon poet, the Binra Full Moon Poet Day here in Sri Lanka, talking about something significant, something that means a lot to everyone out there. And whilst thanking him for being with us, I think you've been with us giving insight to what Buddhism and spirituality and all of it right through poem discussions on Rise and Shine. Thank you very much, sir. And with that, it's time for Buddhima and I to say goodbye on today's edition of Rise and Shine. See you same time, same place. Bye-bye from us.